Hey guys, this is Mark Hutten with AdultAspergersChat.com, and I oftentimes get emails, comments on my blog post or Facebook pages from NT wives stating that they don't understand mind blindness. They say something along the lines of, I just don't understand why he can't see certain things. I tell him over and over how I feel, and he just never seems to get it. And I just don't understand this mind blindness thing. Well, it's hard for somebody who is mind sighted, to make up a term, to understand somebody who's mind blind. Now, you could easily imagine what it would be like to be blind. All you'd have to do is put some blinders on and walk around the house, try to get out in the driveway to get in your car, and try to make your way through the grocery, and you could easily duplicate that and know exactly what it's like to be blind. Or you could plug up your ears and you would know what it's like to be deaf, but you're never going to know, for example, I'm just going to make up a perhaps ridiculous example, what it would be like growing up as a child in a Nazi concentration camp. We can't duplicate that because we'd have to go back in time, we'd have to set up a concentration camp, we'd have to relocate to Germany, you'd have to regress from adulthood down to childhood, and so there's just too many there's no way to replicate that or do an experiment, so to speak, to give you some indication of what it might be like to be a 5-year-old little girl growing up in a Nazi concentration camp. You're never going to know what that feels like. So in the same way, since you're mind-sighted, you're never going to know what it is to be mind-blind. And so it would make sense to me why it doesn't make sense to you that he doesn't get it. So the best I can do to help you is set up a little experiment here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 comments, and I want you to tell me which one is sarcastic and which one is authentic or honest. Okay, you ready? Thanks a lot, Dave. Okay, here's the second one. Thanks a lot, Dave. Okay, of those 2, which one was sarcastic and which one was genuine? You have no clue. The mind-blind individual, or the person with alexithymia, which we call them, they would be the alexithymic, both of those statements appeared the same. But here's what they looked like for the mind-sighted person. Here's the first one. Thanks a lot, Dave. Here's the second one. Thanks a lot, Dave. The mind-blind individual can't tell the difference between the two. And so when you are, for example, sarcastic with your mind-blind spouse and expect him to get that it's sarcasm, he's not going to get it. Or if you say, well, I feel this way about that, and you expect him to take how you feel and apply it to some course of action he's supposed to take, he's not going to get that. So with this business of being out of touch with what other people might be thinking or what they might be feeling, we have to be very concrete instead of vague. We have to make our message very short so we don't end up with data dumping, and now he has data overload, and there's too many factors involved to dissect each one and figure out what he's supposed to get. I hope that makes sense, guys.
Hey guys, this is Mark Hutten with AdultAspergersChat.com, and I wanted to take a deep dive into explaining this business of mind blindness and why it can cause problems in relationships. So this will get a little on the technical side. So the Diagnostic Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders defines 6 key domains of cognitive function, and they are social cognition, perceptual motor function, learning and memory, language, executive function, and complex attention. Now, mind blindness, which in essence is the opposite of empathy, is a cognitive disorder in which the person with Asperger's or high-functioning autism is unable to, or finds it very difficult to, predict the mental states of others. For example, their thoughts, beliefs, emotions, desires, behaviors, intentions, and so on. Now, it's not necessarily caused by an inability to imagine an answer, but it is often due to an inability to gather enough information to decipher which of the many possible answers is correct. And this is referred to as an empathetic cognitive deficit. Now, empathy is usually divided into two major components. There's cognitive empathy, and that's the ability to understand another's perspective or mental state. And then there's affective empathy, which is the ability to respond with an appropriate emotion to another's mental state. Now, cognitive and affective empathy are also independent from one another. For example, you may not be very good at understanding another person's perspective, but you may be very good at empathizing with other people. So people on the autism spectrum have deficits in both cognitive and affective empathy. Okay, so now I want to look at the subcategories of both cognitive and affective empathy. Cognitive empathy can be subdivided into three categories. There's tactical or strategic empathy, which is the deliberate use of perspective taking to achieve certain desired ends. Then there is perspective taking, which is the tendency to spontaneously adopt another person's psychological perspective. And then there's fantasy, which is the tendency to identify with fictional characters. Now, there is two categories that can be subsumed under affective empathy, and they are personal distress, which is possessing feelings of discomfort and anxiety in response to another's suffering. And then there's empathic concern, which is having compassion for others in response to their suffering. So mind blindness is a state where the ability to make automatic interpretations of events, taking into consideration the mental states of people, their desires, and beliefs, has not been developed or is lost in the person on the autism spectrum. So can you imagine living with a disorder in which you can't perceive or interpret the behavior of others? For example, their needs and desires, their feelings, beliefs, their goals, purposes. All of these things are a total mystery to you. The higher their anxiety goes, the worse the mind blindness, and the more difficulty they're going to have with interpersonal relationships and all the emotional nuances that come with relationships. So the social and cognitive impairments seen in people on the autism spectrum can be attributed to mind blindness. Let me repeat that. The social and cognitive impairments seen in people on the autism spectrum can be attributed to mind blindness. The abnormal behavior of these individuals includes a lack of reciprocity, difficulty empathizing with others, being totally withdrawn from social settings, especially under high stress, sometimes not being able to make eye contact, and again, if the anxiety is high, they have little to no desire to interact with other people, which we call social detachment.
My husband has Asperger's syndrome, and we've been married for over 15 years. He has trouble understanding my emotions. Whenever I tell him how I feel about a particular thing, he seems indifferent, and all I get is a blank expression. And she wants to know, is this typical of Asperger's, or is this just a personality trait of his? Well, without talking to your husband face to face, I'm going to guess that you're dealing with an Asperger's trait there rather than the fact that he's just selfish and doesn't care about how you feel. I would find that hard to believe. If you've been married to him for 15 years, you must have been doing a lot of things right. Now, keep in mind that your husband has, if he has Asperger's syndrome, he has this thing called mind blindness. And a lot of people have difficulty understanding, what is that? Well, let's imagine a movie scene, okay, that begins with the following scenario. A woman enters a bedroom and she walks around in it. She opens a few drawers She looks behind some dressers. She looks underneath the bed, and then she leaves. Okay, that's the scene. Now, most people couldn't witness that scene without thinking about, why this woman was in the bedroom looking around for stuff. Maybe she was looking for something she thought was in the bedroom. Maybe she heard something in there and wanted to find out what made the noise. Multiple thoughts might go through your head. Now, all of these explanations are based on our inferences about the woman's mental state. Okay, what we're attempting to do, in essence, is to read her mind. And most of us neurotypicals engage in such mind reading all day long, every day. In other words, we try to figure out what other people's motives are. What did they mean by this particular statement, and so on. And without this ability, we would be mind blind. We'd be unaware of other people's mental existence, of the existence of thoughts, emotions, intentions, and so on. We would be unable to make sense of the actions of others, and unfortunately, that's the dilemma that your husband is in. He has difficulty making sense of others, including their emotions. So your husband may have trouble understanding the emotions of other people in general, yours and coworkers and so on, and also it's very possible that the subtle messages that are sent to him from other people by way of facial expression, eye contact, body language, and so on, he probably misses these little things. He doesn't pick up on these subtle cues, and so he may come off as being egotistical, selfish, or uncaring. And I think that these are rather unfair labels because he is neurologically unable to understand other people's emotional states due to this mind blindness stuff. He might even be kind of upset and remorseful when people tell him, that what he said or what he did was hurtful or inappropriate. So in answer to your question, yes, difficulty understanding other people's emotions is definitely an Asperger's trait. And what you could do to help him with that would be one of the things you can do is to stop talking in terms of feelings. It would be like if he didn't speak French, but you do, and so you have an important message for him and you tell him this message in French. He doesn't get it. So you stop speaking French and you start speaking English. And the same thing is true with feelings. Since he's not an individual who can tune in to exactly how you're feeling, and since he has the empathy level of someone with Asperger's syndrome, you want to stop talking feelings and start talking facts. And I know that's probably not your style. But in the future, instead of saying, well, I feel this way about that, you may just want to cut to the chase and tell him what you need him to do differently.
Due to mind blindness, the Asperger's adult does not always understand the motives of others. Unfortunately, when he or she is impacted negatively by another person's words or actions, but doesn't understand why that person would say or do such a thing, the individual tends to fill in the void with a negative. For example, she said that to hurt me, or he did that because he doesn't like me. Because the individual is pretty much in a constant state of misunderstanding others' motives and subsequently filling in the void with a negative, the individual often perceives himself or herself as being on the receiving end of criticism, disrespect, and downright emotional abuse. Now that the individual is wounded and feels like a victim, he or she responds at times with retaliatory techniques and at other times with isolation and avoidance, both of which often elicit a negative response from others. This negative feedback from others serves to provide proof in the individual's mind that others are indeed out to get me. And that is the self-fulfilling prophecy.